This session is Living Child-Free with No Regrets. We have three women speaking with us today. We have Lisa Manterfield, Lynn, Newman, Zavaro, and Tracey, Cleantis.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. This session, as she just said, is about living child-free with no regrets. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please share your views and continue the conversation on Twitter or Facebook at Fertility Planit with hashtag #FPLA14. We'd love to hear from you. First, I want to introduce myself, the players here. I'll start with me. My name's Tracey Cleantis, and I'm a psychotherapist and writer and blogger and etc. And I'm really delighted to be here. This is my second time being here at Fertility Planit. And what's really exciting for me is that if I'm here talking to you about living child-free without regret, it means I'm living child-free without regret. And I am. Let me tell you a little bit about my journey. I tried desperately to conceive. I spent 10 years and about $100,000 on my treatment. And when I stopped trying to conceive and let go and move on, I began to write about my experience on Label Rouge and Huffington Post and Psychology Today. And last year at the conference, we spoke about moving on and letting go of the hope of having a biological child. And in preparing for that event, I became aware all that I'd really learned about letting go and moving on and how to find unexpected happiness, even though at the time when I stopped trying to conceive, I never ever imagined that I could be happy without that longed-for child. And I'm here to say that it turns out that happiness is possible, even if you don't get what you want most. And out of my awareness of that, I've written a book that's going to come out in the spring for Hazelden called The Other Side of Impossible: How to Let Go of the Life You Planned and Find a Happy Ending. In my practice as a psychotherapist, I have the privilege of working with people who are struggling to let go of a dream and helping them find unexpected happiness. I want to just take a minute to talk about the word regret, because that's part of our title today. I want to make a little distinction about it. Regret, this is from a blog post I wrote on Label Rouge. Regret can have two different kinds of meanings: to look back with distress or sorrowful longing, to grieve for on remembering, and or two, the pain or distress in the mind at something done or left undone. Of course, if you wanted to have a child and don't, it's likely that you're going to feel some of that first kind of regret. It's normal and natural to feel some sorrow about not getting what you wanted most. However, the regrets that you don't have to have are the pain or distress in the mind at something done or left undone. Doing all that you can, all that you're comfortable with, all that you can manage in planning for your child is important in minimizing this kind of regret. This is the kind of regret we're discussing today. I also want to quickly announce that tomorrow I'm going to be expanding on this topic from 12 to 12:45 in the Malibu room, helping you create a fertility prenup, how to plan your treatment to minimize regret. Let me introduce the other players. First, this is Lynn, Newman, Zavaro. She has a master's in counseling psychology and spiritual psychology. She's the creator of The Game of You and The Game of Insight, an interactive way to know yourself and create the life you want. Lisa Manterfield, also returning from last year, is the founder of LifeWithoutBaby.com and the author of I'm Taking My Eggs and Going Home: How One Woman Dared to Say No to Motherhood. She also is the author of the soon-to-be-released novel, The Skeptic's Guide to Reincarnation. For more information on any of the speakers, please go to fertilityplanit.com. So, Lynn, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. It's really an honor to be here. It's a really amazing group of speakers and people who are going to be here this weekend. I think it's going to be very inspiring and impactful. This is probably the oddest timing to have this talk. This is at the second session of the beginning of the conference because it's a difficult one. And I have a lot of compassion for those of you who are open to the discoveries of looking at other possibilities. And for me, it's kind of a self-honoring process because I can't even imagine a year ago being able to sit here and have this conversation today. I wouldn't have been prepared. There was still some things that I was working through inside myself. So I'm unbelievably nervous to speak about some of this, and at the same time relieved and happy to be in this moment in my life and with you all. So real briefly, a little bit of my story is at 36, I was ready to settle down and get married and have a family and have babies. And I met a really wonderful man, and we began the process of getting pregnant and had difficulties. I had 1 surgery and 4 miscarriages, and then 3 failed in vitro fertilization rounds. It was an individual decision of mine, and also my husband's at the time, to take a break after that process. And in that break, I really had to look at some of the things that I teach, which is about knowing ourselves and creating the life that we want, and get really truthful and honest with myself. And I opted at that juncture to stop the process of going through trying to conceive biologically. And so I'm here today to talk a little bit about what it's like on the other side and what really wonderful things have come into my life in replacement of that journey.
Lisa, would you tell us a little bit about you and your story?
I'd love to, yeah. And I'm very glad to be here again this year. We spoke on this panel last year for the first time, and I really applaud you for having the courage to come and sit in this conversation that I know that you don't want to have, because I wouldn't have wanted to have it until somebody broached that subject with me, which I'll talk about a little later. So my story, very briefly, is that I was 34 when I finally fell in love with somebody that I trusted to have children with. And we went on a journey like everybody else here. And we had a misdiagnosis for a number of years, so we were quite a few years into our journey when we realized, what our options were going to be. And we had actually, Tracey talked about a prenup. We had actually had the discussion before we even began to try to conceive as to how far we were willing to go and what options we were willing to take. And I'm very, very glad that we had that conversation, because we overstepped those boundaries, but we knew that we'd overstepped them when we did. And so I had never been pregnant. I have never been pregnant. And we reached the end of our line where the only viable option for us was going to be egg donation, and that was a choice that we decided was not going to be right for us. So we took a venture into the world of adoption. And by that time, we were about 5 years into our journey, and we were about as wrung out as we had ever been. And what I started to notice was this wonderful man that I'd met, who I wanted to go on this journey with, was going in this direction, and I was going in this direction. And we then stopped and had a discussion of, okay, how far do we want to go? What are we willing to risk to get this goal? And we decided that in actual fact, what we wanted was this relationship that we had. And we stepped off the train and made the decision to not have children. And it's probably one of the most difficult decisions that I ever had to make, but I know now that it was the right decision for us. I'm the founder of lifewithoutbaby.com, which is something that I didn't really set out to do. But when I made my decision, I looked around and people were not talking about this topic. It was a really taboo topic. Tracey was out there talking about it, and Pamela Mahoney-Sigdinas, who writes Silent Sorority, she was talking about it, but it was just not a topic that was discussed. So I started writing about it, started blogging about it, and found a lot of women out there who were just like me, who thought they were alone and thought they were the only people that had ever made this decision. And we have a wonderful, vibrant international community right now of women who are figuring out how they're going to create this happy life and get from where they are and letting go of that dream to figuring out what's next. So I'm very glad to be here and speak about this today.
Let me start by asking both of you a question. What was your individual process in the decision to not have a child? And how is this in your relationship to what you teach about knowing yourself and creating the life you want? You wanted to start with that, Lynn?
Sure. When I do teach, sort of work on 4 different playing fields, and that is the mental, the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual levels. So sort of breaking down those 4 levels for myself, beginning with the emotional, there was a lot of different levels of grief that came through the process. There was grief after the miscarriages. There was grief when I discovered that I was infertile or having issues. There was grief around the IVFs failing, and then there was a big grief in coming to let go of the identity of being a mother and what that meant. So the tools that I had underneath my belt, besides reaching out for enormous support, which I think is extremely important, to be able to talk about this, to have a place to be able to express our feelings around this. Interestingly enough, just as a segue, part of the letting go process of choosing not to become a mother is not very much different than the letting go process of what it's like when one is a mother. Because once we attach to our child, they begin to individuate, and they go to school, and then they become teenagers, and sometimes they're rebellious, and then they go off to college. So at all times as women, I think that we're being asked to learn how to let go at all given moments, and then how to fill ourselves with ourselves fully. To live our fullest life and self without being dependent upon something that's outside of ourselves, like a child, like a man. So very much of this was my own experience of learning about how I was going to fill me with me in order to really feel fulfilled and whole in my life. So as I grieved, I let go, and I made more space available to myself, to come to myself, and to fill that up with me, with what I really love and what I enjoy. And I found I became much more creative. I had much more energy and vitality. I look back at that time. I was looking at a picture last week of myself, and there was a sadness. There was an energy about me that I didn't recognize that is very different than who I am today, and now on the other side of this process. And so it's become an empowering process for me. And this might be the weirdest thing to say, but I feel like in the process of trying to see if I could give birth to a child, I actually kind of gave birth to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you relate to that, Lee?
I relate to that, absolutely. Yeah, definitely a rediscovery of myself, but the question was about the decision leading up to that. And really, what I've learned in hindsight and what I learned through stumbling around in the dark for a long time was keeping an eye on what it was that I really wanted. And I realized that I had really lost track of that. And it had become a mission to not fail. And every time something went wrong, I just felt that I had failed again, and that was not acceptable. And so I realized that what was driving me was this desire to not fail. And I completely lost touch with who I was, what my goals were as far as motherhood, and what I wanted to get from that, and my relationship. And so kind of taking a step back and being able to see that I had really lost my true self, and everything in my life at that time was focused on becoming a mother. And everything else fell away. And I think about, friends that kind of disappeared, and the things that I love to do, traveling, everything really, that my, even the physical activities that I enjoyed doing, so many of those have been put on hold because, well, what if I get pregnant? I don't want to be training, I don't want to be running, if, I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize what I'm trying to do. And so much of myself fell away. And I love this idea, and Tracey and I were just talking a little bit about this, about reinvention and a reincarnation that I have been writing about in my fiction and not quite made the connection that that's what I've been doing in my real life as well. So, a good therapist is really helpful to guide you, point yourself out to yourself. But this idea of just reinvention and finding, okay, who am I really? I know who I wanted to be, but who am I going to be now?
I relate to so much of what you both say, and I feel like when I think back, there wasn't really a decision not to have a child. It wasn't a decision to, I'm not going to do this. But I do remember, and I feel like this was an enormous saving grace for me, the night before I began my first IVF cycle, this very wise voice in my head that didn't sound at all like me said, at some point, if this doesn't work, you're going to stop. And at the time, I was a little jarred by the idea, if this doesn't work, because I was quite frankly delusional. I mean, there was no other option. I was not open to that. But having that every month allowed me, in a very kind of crude prenup, which I would advise to have a more elaborate one, but it just allowed me to check in every month to say, is this it? Am I done? Am I? And there was a certain point where after I had another failed round, I just had a knowing in me that it wasn't going to work. I could keep going, I could keep trying, and I was depleted. Financially, I was depleted. Relationally, I was depleted. Emotionally. As you said, I was not investing in other areas of my life. It was just about having a baby. And I was a person who was a goal setter. I had like a list of goals, and I would check, and I was going to have a baby. So I've got to do everything. So I had to find out what life was like in that ambiguous state. I had to learn about ambiguity. I had to, so much was required of me of growing in this process. But I've got to say, it wasn't really a decision for me. It wasn't, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. It was just for me a knowing of, this isn't going to work, and I have nothing left to give. And I just want to say that just because I know that doesn't mean that everything was okay then, just because I got that. It was not okay. It was, right. I was a hot mess for a long time.
Well, and I think,
and I'm a therapist, so
yeah. I think that this conference is a lot about it's the truth about trying. I think that's really what this is about, and we all individually have our own stories and our own experiences. And I think in this panel in particular, it's sort of like take what you want and leave the rest, to find your own individual experience and journey and your choices and decisions along the way. I mean, for me, I got capped. I told myself 45 was when I was going to stop. Like, I just knew I didn't want to have a baby past 45. And that just was personal for me, whether it was adopting or biological, that's what felt right. So we all have our individual times to choose what feels right for us.
And I think mine was more of a fizzling out, and more of a, okay, I'm done, I can't do this anymore. Oh, but wait, but maybe I'll just, maybe the next time will be the time, or okay, no, I'm done again. But so I definitely did a lot of flip-flopping back and forth before I flipped onto the side of, I really cannot do this anymore.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
And I think there's, for forgetting that too. I mean, I think there were moments where my period would be late and I'd already come to, I'm done, but I would get again into the fantasy and get hooked in again and have to come back, okay, no, this is where I am, and let go again. Lynn, I was wondering if you could tell us some tips and tools that you teach people that you could share with the audience today in terms of really relating to this challenge. And
yeah, sure. I was mentioning before that I sort of work on 4 levels, and I addressed the emotional level. On the mental level, I could pop over to something that you were saying, which really resonated for me, which was about this feeling of fear of failure and this sense of failure. And, you know, in our lives, we pick up so many belief systems. I mean, we're conditioned to believe so many certain things about ourselves, whether it's from our families or society, our culture, our churches, our temples, that we start to learn that we pick up. And for me, it was this pressure that this is what I should do. You know, I should turn 36, I should have a family, I should have a baby. And the opportunity is to upgrade, to reframe in a positive way some of these belief systems that we pick up so that they work for us positively. I definitely went through a period where I felt like I was a failure, that my eggs were bad. That meant I was bad, that there was something wrong with me, that I failed my husband, that I failed my mother, that my body failed me, and that I was meant to biologically do this and there was something wrong with me. So I had to get to the root of that and unravel it. There ain't anything bad or wrong with me. Nothing, right? I'm free, and I get to live my life according to me and not by the rules and of society and conditionings. So this is one of the tools that I do work with, is how can we upgrade and reframe the beliefs that we carry about ourselves. And then spiritually, it really was, for me, about looking at the fact that I cannot control or force nature. And I don't have any chart. I mean, I can't make an apple drop off a tree. It's not my job. And so I had to learn how to adapt, go with the flow, and be a part of the natural process to see really what was most in store for me, what my purpose was, and for my own journey.
I think the biggest moment of understanding for me came when I really fully understood what a loss this was and what a loss infertility as a whole is. And I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a failure. And once I realized that this was a big loss of who I was identifying with as a woman, you know, the things that I wanted from life, and realized that this is a loss just the same as if, you know, somebody you know passes away, and that I had to process that loss in the same way, grieve it in the same way, and commemorate it in the same way. And so this is what I teach now is that process of creating a stopping point and creating a marker for yourself that says this is the end and this is the point from which I'm going to move forward and which I'm going to work through this loss and grieve this loss and come out the other side just as I would any other loss.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to speak to that if someone dies, it's clear cut. Mm-hmm. And this is not such a clear cut loss. And I remember when I would share my grief, that I was going through grief with people, or write about it, and I would get bombarded with, but did you try this? But did you try that? But did you do this? But did you do that? And the message that I got was that I wasn't allowed to grieve, that I wasn't allowed to let go until I had done everything, including sacrificing goats, and you know, that there was no limit to, there's always something more, but there was a personal limit for me. That's where my grieving started. But when someone dies, we don't say, well, are they really dead? Did you hold up a mirror? You know, let's dig up the body and did you try this on him? But we do that with the grief of infertility. And people do that to us, but we get to decide when it's time for us to let go and us to grieve without having to make any excuses or any apologies.
And I think there's a real value to find in that support network as well of people who do understand that loss and that grief, because I also found that people wanted to put a timeline on how long I could be sad about this, and it wasn't a very long timeline, and I actually needed to be sad about it for a lot longer than that. I'm finding other people who understood that understood that sadness came and went, and that, you know, even several years later, when everything's good and I feel that I'm in recovery and on this new path, that something would come up and trigger that sadness again. And there you go back and work through that again. So, so I'm pretty adamant about people not putting a timeline on other people's grief, because you wouldn't do that for any other kind of loss.
Lisa, could you talk about ideas on finding support and dealing with family and friends and events such as baby showers?
Yeah, well, let's start with baby showers. If somebody invites you to a baby shower and you don't want to go, don't go. Don't go. I mean, we have feel this obligation that we've got to put on this brave face and put on a smile and be happy. And, you know, at some point, you're going to be happy for somebody who is having what you wanted and is getting what you wanted. But if that's not now, please don't torture yourselves. I mean, I don't lie. I'm a terrible liar. And so I just don't do it because I always get caught. But when it comes to baby showers and events where I know that it's going to be really uncomfortable for me, I've told some pretty good lies. I've even used fake text messages, actually, to get out of difficult conversations. But you need to give yourself that space to go through what you're going through and not try to be this wonderful, amazing person right now for everybody else. So that's what I would say about baby showers. Getting support, again, you know, family and friends aren't always as supportive as we would like them to be. And I think that I like to kind of have this image of a circle of safety and support that you don't let everybody into, and that you become very selective about who you let into that circle, and that you maybe have to test carefully whether somebody that you think is going to be part of your support network really is before you fully let them in. And I think, and it's also fluid, because I found that people have tolerance levels of how much they really want to be there. But there's a lot more now, certainly than when I was first moving into this phase. There's a lot more support online. There are a lot more people talking about this topic and kind of coming out of the shadows and being very open about it. But find support, find a good therapist, find even just one friend or one person that you can talk with online who understands where you are is invaluable. You feel like you're the only person in the world that's ever gone through this, but you're not. They're out there.
Yeah, I would say that the first thing I did after I stopped crying was Google how to live without a child, how to live after infertility, and I slowly, the first thing I found was a website that told me not to go to Disneyland, but I'd figured that out. But then I met Lisa and I met Pamela at Silent Sorority, and I found other people who got it, and it was a place where I didn't have to apologize for my pain. They really understood, and no one told me, yeah, but look at the other side and think positive, and you're so lucky, you get to go shopping more because you're not having kids. And you know, people would say those kind of things to me in my real life, but in my online community I didn't hear that. And the other place I went was to therapy, and it was a place where I could just keen and wail and grieve it fully, which allowed me to move on and let go and find unexpected happiness. Time is running away with us. I'm wondering if anyone out here has questions. I have more questions for the panel, but certainly want to hear your questions. Nothing coming up? Okay.
How are you guys feeling? What's the temperature? Oh, good, I got some smiles. That's good. Okay, good. Yes.
I have a question. How do you handle when people constantly ask why you do not have children?
I'm happy to take that. In the beginning, it was a process for me. In the beginning, I used a lot of euphemisms. That's what I was comfortable with. I would say, I wasn't blessed, it just hasn't worked out. And what I found is the more I grew in my own process of really accepting it, now when people ask me, I say, because I'm infertile. And I tried this and this and this, and yes, I tried adoption, and that's it. And if they ask me a follow-up question and I don't want to talk about it, I don't talk about it. So you need to say whatever you need to say at that point, and it might change and it might evolve.
Yeah, I always think of it as having kind of an elevator speech where, if you go to a function, you've got like your little pocket of topics, and actually practice what you want to say when somebody asks that. And it definitely does change. And I've gone from everything from, kind of apologizing for it not working out and, and to saying, I just don't. People ask, do you have kids? No. And I don't need to explain to you why not. But you do automatically do that. You feel like you want to fill in the gap. And I found that if you phrase it as a problem, that people want to give you a solution. And they ask those questions of, well, did you try this and did you try that? And so kind of not, I have a friend who says, no, but we travel instead. What happens is I think people are looking for a connection, and having children is something that, the majority, well, not at the moment the majority, but that's changing, I think, that could be a common point. And I think people are looking for a point of connection. And so if you give them another point of connection, another topic to talk about, sometimes I say, just know, do you, and give them the floor. But sometimes I know that you don't want to hear about other people's children. A lot of times you don't want to. But I think just figuring out what's going to be comfortable for you and being ready with that answer. And it does change. It does evolve. And I've also had the topic that, the situation where I have explained the whole story. And probably made the person, which they'd never asked in the first place, but it's what you're comfortable with. But yeah, I think being ready to answer that question in a way that's comfortable for you.
Go ahead.
Were all of you at the same point with your partners when you made that decision? And what I mean by that is, had you kind of made that decision for yourself and then approached your partner, or had that been kind of an ongoing conversation about having a finish line of sorts?
I think for us, we had talked about that there would be some point. I think that he was willing to go on a little bit longer than I was, but ultimately he was supportive and respectful and understood that it was me going through the shots and it was me going through all of those procedures, and really respected and supported where I was.
Yeah, I want to take the opposite side of that, because we had talked about how far we were willing to go, and I did say that we crossed that line, and I think my husband reached the end of his line. I know that he reached the end of his line before I did, and it was really difficult because, at some level I knew that we had crossed that boundary and that I was going on, and I knew that he had stopped where we said we were going to stop. But at the same time, I felt that, he wasn't being supportive, and well, had he changed his mind and it wasn't fair, and this is, well, I'm going to do it anyway, and kind of, soldiering on alone. And that's, and realized much later that, yeah, in actual fact, we had talked about this, and I had passed that point, and I was going on, and I was able to kind of step back and reevaluate then. But it was I would say about 6 months or so, I had that feeling that I was doing it on my own. He was there, he was right behind me, but he wasn't really with me. And it was really difficult. And I think that's actually quite common, that one partner will reach the end of their comfort zone. And I really think what Tracey said right at the beginning about understanding your own comfort level and not, there are so many options out there. I mean, you really could go on and on and on. And so understanding what your comfortable stopping point is and letting that be okay, and kind of finding a way to push out all the other possibilities and know that this is where I'm going to go. Even if you step over it, at least you know when you've passed.
Yeah, in my situation, it sort of was the opposite. When my husband and I decided to take a break, he did also feel that it was necessary to take a break because it had been taxing on both of us. And in that time of taking the break, I became closer and closer to the decision that I didn't want to have children. He did say to me, I had this feeling that you never wanted children. And I said, no, I don't think that to be true. But what I know right now is that if I were to have children, I wouldn't be a happy mother. And we ended up divorcing. Yeah. And he really, really wanted to have a family and have children. And so we went lovingly our separate directions. Yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback on something you said. I wrote a post for Huffington Post where I talked about being happy with the way things worked out, and I was greeted with an onslaught of anger, and people told me, if you're happy about it, it means that you didn't really want it. I wanted it. Mm-hmm. I really did. Yeah. I wouldn't have gone through all of that pain and money and time if I didn't really want it. But I am happy with the way it turned out. That doesn't mean that there's not times where I don't pine for that baby. And, she and he are still in my heart, even though they never manifested. So the grief remains, but that said, I'm happy with the way it turned out. Any other questions?
So I'm a fertility acupuncturist, and you ladies are perfect to ask this question to your therapists and women who've chosen not to have to go on with the process. But I feel like on my end, I get a lot of the showing up and disappearing, and people in that kind of gray area where they're kind of still exploring and haven't quite given up. And I wonder if you have any tips for me. Sometimes I'm not a trained therapist, but I kind of want to say, you need to kind of have this frank discussion with yourself or your partner about, do you want to move forward or not? And, because I can feel like this indecision, and I can feel it's not getting them any way, forward or not. So, yeah, any ideas or tips?
I see this a lot in my work with couples, and not just about infertility, but just that not having the conversation because there's maybe a feeling of assuming the other knows, or assuming that the other's on the same page, and not really wanting to clearly define it and address that. And I do think you were talking about that there was a fizzling out, and I think that there can be a kind of not dealing with the unconscious in that action, in that okay, I'm going to show up, and then I'm not going to show up, and it seems to me like it's a kind of moving towards some acceptance. So when I see that in my clients, I do say, it seems like you're kind of going back and forth from wanting it and taking steps towards it to not. So I really want to mirror that ambivalence, that you're really not wanting to do either, and that's a hard place to be. So just making that conscious, I think, can be helpful.
For me, I find that the confusion and the ambivalence is such a natural part of the process that the opportunity is just to allow that to be on the path and present. the unknowing, the not knowing. We get so much pressure from all kinds of people, especially our doctors, about how little time we have left, that it can be so overbearing on the spirit and on the mind and on the body. To have that pressure over us, that I think as a facilitator or as a practitioner, offering as much space as you can for that journey is really, really supportive and helpful.
And just to add to that, I think some of my ambivalence came from not knowing that it was okay to stop, and that not having children was an option. And it was, I mean, that's a difficult position for you to be in, and I would not want to be a person that would want to encourage somebody to stop trying. But I had a friend who talked, kind of skirted the edges of the conversation, but said, you know, we had some problems, and then we finally realized that we were already a family. We were just a family of two, and that we were going to be okay that way. And nobody had ever said anything like that to me before, and it was a real aha moment of, yeah, I do have a family. We're just a small family, and that it's okay. I saw somebody who was okay living that life that I couldn't envision. So I'm not really sure how you offer that, but I think that's where certainly a lot of the ambivalence for me came, was not being able to see an alternative.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this time has gone incredibly quickly.
Yeah,
and it is right. It's 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting in my eyes. I want to thank you all so much for coming. I want to remind you that you can learn more or contact any of the speakers through fertilityplanet.com. Also, you can watch the videos of all sessions on the Fertility Planet website soon. For Fertility Planet, or follow Fertility Planet on Twitter, Facebook for news and conversation on all the sessions. We want to thank FORA.TV for recording all the programs at Fertility Planet, and want to thank you, Lynn and Lisa, for being here today and sharing your experience. And thank you so much for joining us. We love you being here. Thank you.